33 Black R&B legends and their beautiful daughters. What if the greatest pain in music history wasn't written in songs, but lived at home? Behind every legendary voice, there's a story the stage lights never show. While the world celebrated hits, awards, and sold-out arenas, many of these icons were quietly fighting battles as parents, trying to protect their children from the very fame that made them legends. Some children inherited talent, others inherited trauma, and some inherited silence. This is not a story about fame. This is a story about legacy. Tonight, Black Excellence Legends takes you beyond the records, beyond the headlines, and into the emotional truth that shaped generations, where love, loss, and survival collided behind closed doors. If you believe legendary artists were more than their music, hit like, subscribe, and comment below right now. Tell us, should the world separate the art from the parent, or are they forever connected? Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown. Bobby Christina Brown. Whitney Houston and her daughter Bobby Christina Brown shared a bond shaped by extraordinary love and extraordinary pressure. Whitney was already one of the most celebrated voices in modern music when Bobby Christina was born on March 4, 1993, the only child of Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown. At that time, Whitney was at the absolute peak of her career. The Bodyguard soundtrack was breaking global records, and I Will Always Love You dominated charts worldwide, selling more than 20 million copies. Yet behind the success, Whitney was navigating the challenge of balancing global superstardom with motherhood. For Whitney, Bobby Christina was not an accessory to fame, but a refuge from it. In interviews, she often described her daughter as her anchor and reason to keep going. Friends and family later confirmed that Whitney was most at peace when she was at home, away from cameras, caring for her child. Despite tabloid portrayals of chaos, Whitney worked consistently to shield Bobby Christina from the harshest edges of celebrity life, enrolling her in private schools and limiting media exposure during her early years. However, growing up as the daughter of two world-famous parents came with unavoidable consequences. Bobby Christina was raised under intense public scrutiny, witnessing both the brilliance and the instability of her parents' relationship. As Whitney's struggles with substance abuse became public in the 2000s, Bobby Christina's life was increasingly shaped by uncertainty. Still, those close to the family recall moments of tenderness. Whitney singing softly to her daughter at night, attending school events, and insisting that Bobby Christina understand the importance of faith and self-worth. The bond between them deepened as Whitney's career slowed. Bobby Christina was often by her mother's side during later years, appearing with her at events and interviews. When Whitney Houston died suddenly on February 11, 2012, at the age of 48, the loss shattered Bobby Christina. She was only 18 years old and publicly devastated, repeatedly expressing that her mother was everything to her. Tragically, Bobby Christina's life followed a painful echo of her mother's fate. On January 31, 2015, she was found unresponsive in a bathtub at her home in Georgia. After months in hospice care, she passed away on July 26, 2015, at the age of 22. Medical reports confirmed that her death resulted from drowning, with intoxication as a contributing factor. Facts officially documented and widely reported. The story of Whitney Houston and Bobby Christina Brown is not one of scandal, but of inheritance. Inherited fame, inherited vulnerability, and inherited love. Whitney left behind a musical legacy unmatched in scope, with over 200 million records sold worldwide. Bobby Christina, though never fully able to escape her parents' shadows, remains a symbol of the human cost behind celebrity perfection. Together, they remind the world that behind legendary voices are real families, and behind applause are fragile hearts trying to survive the weight of fame. Stevie Wonder and Aisha Morris. The story of Stevie Wonder and his daughter Aisha Morris is not built on spectacle, but on intimacy, an intimacy shaped by sound, touch, and faith rather than sight. Stevie Wonder, born Stevlin Hardaway Morris in 1950, lost his vision shortly after birth due to complications with an incubator. Yet blindness never confined him. Instead, it sharpened his connection to the world. By the early 1970s, Stevie had already transformed popular music, releasing landmark albums like Talking Book and Inner Visions, redefining soul, funk, and pop with unprecedented emotional depth. When Aisha Morris was born on February 2, 1975, Stevie was entering one of the most creatively fertile periods of his life. Fatherhood arrived not as a distraction, but as an awakening. Unlike many celebrity parents, Stevie did not experience his daughter through visual milestones. He learned her presence through sound, her breathing, her laughter, the rhythm of her movements. Friends later shared that Stevie often placed his hands gently on Aisha's face, memorizing her features through touch, building a bond rooted in trust rather than appearance. That bond found its most famous expression in music. In 1976, Stevie released Isn't She Lovely, a song that remains one of the most joyful celebrations of parenthood ever recorded. The track famously includes the sound of Aisha crying as a newborn in the recording studio, an intentional, intimate choice. Stevie did not write the song to impress audiences. He wrote it to preserve a moment of pure love. The song reached the top 10 on the Billboard charts and has since become a global anthem for new parents, directly tying Stevie's artistic legacy to his role as a father. Growing up, Aisha Morris was exposed to creativity, but not forced into it. Stevie encouraged curiosity, discipline, and emotional intelligence rather than fame. While she occasionally appeared with him, most notably singing alongside her father at the 1994 Grammy Awards, Aisha's upbringing was intentionally grounded. Stevie emphasized education, spirituality, and independence, repeatedly stating that his children should never feel defined by his success. As an adult, Aisha chose to pursue music on her own terms, performing jazz and soul with restraint rather than spectacle. Her voice carried warmth rather than power, echoing her father's emotional sensitivity instead of mimicking his virtuosity. She also explored work beyond the stage, including education and wellness advocacy, reflecting Stevie's belief that purpose should extend beyond applause. The relationship between Stevie Wonder and Aisha Morris stands as a quiet counterpoint to many tragic celebrity family narratives. There were no public scandals, no destructive spirals played out under flashing cameras. Instead, their story speaks to continuity, how love, when nurtured carefully, can transcend disability, fame, and time. Stevie once said that becoming a father taught him how to listen better. Through Aisha, he learned that the most meaningful connections are often the ones we feel, not the ones we see. Marvin Winans and Lisa Winans. Marvin Winans is widely recognized as one of the most influential voices in modern gospel music. As a founding member of the Winans Family Collective, he helped shape contemporary gospel into a global force, blending spiritual conviction with musical sophistication. Songs like Tomorrow and Ain't No Need to Worry did more than dominate gospel charts. They carried messages of hope into mainstream culture, earning Grammy Awards and decades of reverence. Yet behind the pulpit, the microphone, and the legacy of a legendary musical family, Marvin Winans lived another role with quieter devotion: fatherhood. Lisa Winans grew up surrounded by harmony, prayer, and expectation. Being born into the Winans family meant music was never optional. It was present in the air, in church pews, in living rooms filled with rehearsals and scripture. However, unlike many children raised in famous musical dynasties, Lisa did not gravitate toward the spotlight. From an early age, those close to the family noticed something different about her presence. She carried a stillness that stood in contrast to the powerful voices surrounding her, a calm that did not demand attention yet drew it naturally. Marvin Winans never publicly pressured his daughter to follow the path that defined the family name. His faith-centered worldview emphasized calling over talent, purpose over performance. In sermons and interviews, Marvin often spoke about listening for God's voice rather than chasing applause. That philosophy shaped his relationship with Lisa. While the world expected another powerhouse vocalist to emerge from the Winans lineage, Marvin respected his daughter's inclination toward privacy and reflection. Lisa Winans became known within family and church circles, not for vocal runs or chart success, but for greetings or church services. Observers often remarked on her serene demeanor. One family friend described her as a walking hymn, not because she sang, but because her presence embodied the peace gospel music aims to deliver. Her beauty was understated, rooted in composure rather than performance, reinforcing the idea that legacy does not always announce itself loudly. The bond between Marvin and Lisa reflects a deeper gospel truth. Not all fruit looks the same. Marvin's ministry reached millions through sound and preaching, while Lisa's influence manifested through restraint, empathy, and quiet strength. In a culture that often equates success with visibility, their story challenges that assumption. Lisa's choice to remain largely outside public recognition did not weaken the Winans' legacy. It expanded it, proving that faith can be lived, not just sung. Together, Marvin Winans and Lisa Winans represent two expressions of the same spiritual inheritance. One carried through microphones and sanctuaries, the other carried through character and presence. Their story reminds audiences that the most enduring legacies are not always those preserved on records or awards, but those written in lives shaped by conviction, humility, and love. In the end, their bond stands as a testament to a simple gospel truth. Sometimes the loudest faith is the one that never raises its voice. Rebby Jackson and the Jackson legacy. Rebby Jackson's story cannot be separated from the Jackson legacy because she was there before the lights, before the screams, before the world learned the name Jackson as a symbol of global superstardom. Born Maureen Rylette Jackson in 1950, Rebby was the eldest child of the Jackson family, the first daughter in a household that would later redefine popular music. Long before her younger brothers became international icons, Rebby witnessed the discipline, pressure, and sacrifice that built the foundation of the family's success. Growing up in Gary, Indiana, Rebby experienced a childhood shaped by strict routines and limited comfort. The Jackson household was not a place of indulgence, but a preparation. Music was treated as responsibility, not luxury. As the eldest, Rebby often took on a maternal role, helping raise her younger siblings, maintaining order, and absorbing stress quietly. While the world would later focus on the explosive rise of her brothers, Rebby's contribution was invisible yet essential: stability. As the Jackson legacy expanded through relentless rehearsals and performances, Rebby remained largely in the background. She did not chase the spotlight during the early years, choosing instead to focus on family and personal life. That choice shaped how history remembers her. Unlike her younger siblings, Rebby's relationship with fame was cautious. She understood its cost before she ever embraced its rewards. It was not until the early 1980s, after the Jackson name had become one of the most powerful brands in entertainment, that Rebby released her debut album, Centipede, 1984. The project, written and produced largely by her brother, Michael Jackson, reached the Billboard Top 40 and proved that Rebby possessed both vocal ability and presence. Yet even then, her success felt measured, almost restrained. Rebby never attempted to compete with the phenomenon her family had become. Instead, she carved a space that honored the legacy without being consumed by it. Within the Jackson legacy, Rebby represents continuity rather than spectacle. She bridged generations, remembering the struggle before success and witnessing the consequences after it. As fame brought wealth and recognition, it also brought scrutiny, controversy, and profound personal loss. Rebby remained a steady presence during moments of family crisis, including public scandals and the deaths that would later shake the dynasty. Her role as the eldest daughter gave her a unique authority within the family. She was not defined by chart dominance or record-breaking tours, but by endurance. In interviews, Rebbe has spoken sparingly, often choosing dignity over exposure. That restraint aligns with her lifelong position, close enough to the spotlight to feel its heat, yet strong enough to step back from its glare. Together, Rebbe Jackson and the Jackson legacy tell a story not just of fame, but of foundation. Every dynasty has a beginning, and Rebbe was there at the very start, carrying responsibility before applause, sacrifice before reward. Her life reminds audiences that legacies are not built solely by those who shine the brightest, but by those who hold everything together long enough for others to rise. Michael Jackson and Tamila Jackson. Michael Jackson's legacy is one of the most documented, debated, and dissected in modern history. From a child prodigy in the Jackson 5 to the most famous entertainer on the planet, his life unfolded under relentless global attention. Every movement, every relationship, every rumor became public property. Yet even in a life exposed to extreme visibility, there remain quiet corners, stories spoken in whispers rather than headlines. One such story, often mentioned without confirmation, is that of Tamila Jackson. Unlike Michael's publicly acknowledged children, Tamila Jackson has never been officially confirmed by Michael Jackson, his estate, or verifiable legal records as his daughter. References to her exist primarily in anecdotal accounts, online discussions, and behind-the-scenes industry conversations. For that reason, any discussion of Tamila must be framed carefully, not as established fact, but as part of the broader mythology that has grown around Michael Jackson's life. What draws attention in these accounts is not documentation, but resemblance and timing. Observers have noted physical similarities, facial structure, eyes, and complexion that fueled speculation, particularly during periods when Michael Jackson's private life was intensely guarded. However, resemblance alone is not evidence, and responsible storytelling requires acknowledging that speculation does not equal truth. The reason this narrative persists is deeply tied to Michael Jackson's complicated relationship with privacy and identity. Throughout his adult life, Michael repeatedly expressed a desire to protect children from the pressures he endured. He often spoke about how fame stole his childhood and how he wanted his family life to remain sacred, shielded from public intrusion. Whether or not Tamila Jackson is biologically connected to him, the existence of such stories reflects the world's fascination with Michael's hidden humanity, what may have existed beyond the cameras. In the transcript's framing, Tamila represents not a scandal, but a symbol. The idea that Michael Jackson's story still contains unanswered questions. That symbolism matters more than biological certainty. Michael's life was marked by contradiction, global adoration alongside deep isolation, creative genius alongside personal vulnerability. Any rumored child narrative fits into that pattern of mystery rather than resolution. Importantly, Michael Jackson's verified legacy does not rely on speculation. His documented impact is unparalleled. Over 400 million records sold worldwide, revolutionary music videos, humanitarian work, and cultural influence that reshaped global pop culture. These facts stand independent of rumors. Responsible storytelling ensures that his legacy is not distorted by unproven claims, but contextualized by the environment of secrecy and pressure in which he lived. When discussing Michael Jackson and Tamila Jackson, the ethical approach is clarity without accusation. There is no public proof confirming a father-daughter relationship, and stating otherwise would cross into misinformation. Yet the persistence of this narrative reveals something essential. Michael Jackson's life was so controlled, so scrutinized, that even silence became a source of speculation. In the end, this story is less about lineage and more about boundaries. It reminds audiences that even the most famous man in the world had the right to privacy, and that not every unanswered question needs a definitive answer. Some legacies endure not because everything is known, but because some truths remain respectfully untouched. Diana Ross and Rhonda Ross Kendrick. Diana Ross built her legend in the brightest possible spotlight. As the lead voice of the Supremes, and later a solo icon, she helped define Motown's golden era and reshape the image of Black womanhood in global pop culture. By the early 1970s, Diana was not only a chart-dominating artist, but also a symbol. Elegant, ambitious, and relentlessly visible. It was during this intense period of success that her first daughter, Rhonda Ross Kendrick, was born in 1971, entering a world where legacy arrived before childhood. Rhonda's early life unfolded alongside unanswered questions. Her biological parentage, long rumored to involve Motown founder Berry Gordy, was not publicly acknowledged for years, creating a complex emotional landscape. Yet what defined Rhonda's upbringing was not secrecy, but intention. Diana Ross made a deliberate choice to raise her daughter within a framework of honesty, dignity, and protection. When the truth was eventually shared with Rhonda, it came not through tabloids, but through conversation, an act that preserved trust rather than spectacle. Motherhood reshaped Diana Ross in ways fame never could. Despite a career that demanded constant travel and public presence, Diana emphasized stability at home. She insisted on education, discipline, and self-expression, teaching Rhonda that privilege carried responsibility. Friends of the family have often noted that Diana was most herself not on stage, but in private moments with her children, guiding rather than performing. For Rhonda Ross Kendrick, growing up beside such a towering figure was both an advantage and a test. She inherited visibility without choosing it, and expectations followed her into every room. Yet Rhonda resisted being defined solely as Diana Ross's daughter. She pursued formal education, studying acting and performance with seriousness rather than entitlement. When she entered the entertainment industry, she did so gradually, earning roles in film and television, and later exploring music with a thoughtful, jazz-inflected style. Their bond matured into one of mutual respect. Rhonda has spoken openly about learning resilience from her mother, not just the resilience required to survive fame, but the resilience needed to maintain selfhood within it. Diana, in turn, has publicly celebrated Rhonda's independence, often emphasizing that success means little if it does not produce grounded, compassionate adults. The story of Diana Ross and Rhonda Ross Kendrick stands apart from many celebrity family narratives because it avoids collapse. There are no public implosions, no cycles of scandal replayed across generations. Instead, there is continuity, an evolution from icon to matriarch, from daughter to self-defined woman. Diana passed down not just opportunity, but wisdom. How to exist in the light without being consumed by it. Together, they represent a legacy rooted in grace. Diana Ross showed the world what ambition could look like when paired with elegance. Rhonda Ross Kendrick shows what inheritance can become when paired with self-awareness. Their story reminds us that true legacy is not measured by fame alone, but by the ability to pass strength forward, quietly, intentionally, and intact. James Brown and Andrea Brown. James Brown was known to the world as the godfather of soul, a man whose voice, footwork, and discipline reshaped modern music. He was relentless, demanding, and explosive on stage, an artist who turned rhythm into command and performance into authority. Songs like Papa's Got a Brand New Bag and I Got You, I Feel Good did more than dominate charts. They changed how Black music sounded, moved, and asserted itself. Yet behind the sharp suits and iron control was a man capable of surprising gentleness, a side most clearly revealed through his relationship with his daughter, Andrea Brown. Andrea Brown was born far from the roar of stadiums and the glare of stage lights. According to those close to the family, her birth marked one of the rare moments when James Brown allowed himself to soften completely. Witnesses later recalled that when he first held her, The man known for shouting commands to bands and audiences alike fell silent. He cried openly, an act that contrasted sharply with the public persona built on toughness and dominance. In that moment, James Brown was not a cultural icon. He was simply a father overwhelmed by vulnerability. Raising a child while carrying the weight of superstardom was never simple for James Brown. His life was shaped by poverty, violence, and rigid self-discipline, experiences that fueled both his ambition and his emotional walls. Andrea grew up aware of her father's contradictions, the fierce public figure and the private man who could be protective, attentive, and deeply affected by those he loved. Unlike his relationship with fame, which was loud and demanding, James's bond with Andrea was marked by restraint. Andrea Brown did not grow up seeking the spotlight her father commanded. While she inherited his presence in subtle ways, she chose a life defined more by privacy than performance. Those who encountered her often remarked on the contrast, how her calm demeanor seemed to temper the intensity associated with the Brown name. In many ways, Andrea represented a form of redemption, proof that James Brown, despite his flaws and controversies, understood tenderness. As James Brown's later years unfolded, marked by legal troubles, health struggles, and increasing isolation, his family relationships took on heightened importance. Andrea remained part of his emotional anchor, a reminder of connection beyond applause. When James Brown passed away on December 25, 2006, at the age of 73, public tributes focused on his musical genius. Yet within his family, the loss was more intimate. The absence of a man whose love was often quieter than his reputation suggested. The story of James Brown and Andrea Brown complicates the myth of the unstoppable icon. It reveals that even the most commanding figures carry private spaces where they are unsure, gentle, and human. James Brown taught the world how to move, how to shout, how to claim space. Through Andrea, he also showed, perhaps unintentionally, that strength is incomplete without softness. Together, they represent two sides of the same legacy. One is written in sweat, sound, and revolution. The other lives in moments of silence, protection, and love away from the stage. Their story reminds audiences that no matter how loud a legend becomes, the truest measure of a life is often found in the quiet relationships it leaves behind. Luther Vandross and Diana Vandross, adopted daughter. Luther Vandross was one of the most emotionally precise vocalists in modern music history. His voice did not overpower, it enveloped. With songs like Here and Now, Never Too Much, and Dance with My Father, Luther defined intimacy in R&B, selling more than 40 million records worldwide and earning 8 Grammy Awards. Yet behind the velvet tone and carefully controlled public image was a deeply private man whose most meaningful legacy was not written in liner notes, but lived quietly through love. Luther Vandross never had biological children, a fact that often fueled speculation about his personal life. What remained constant, however, was his devotion to family, particularly to Diana Vandross, his adopted daughter. Their bond was not formed through fame or obligation, but through choice. Luther chose fatherhood deliberately, embracing responsibility without publicity, and raising Diana away from the spectacle that surrounded his career. Diana Vandross was adopted as a child and grew up knowing stability rather than spotlight. Luther was intentional about shielding her from the entertainment industry's pressures. Friends and collaborators have noted that Luther rarely spoke publicly about his personal life, but in private spaces, he was attentive, protective, and nurturing. He believed that love did not need validation, and parenting did not require explanation to the world. While Luther's music often explored longing, heartbreak, and romantic devotion, his relationship with Diana revealed another dimension of love, unconditional and unperformed. He emphasized education, discipline, and emotional grounding, encouraging Diana to build an identity separate from his fame. Unlike many celebrity children, Diana was not groomed for public attention. Her upbringing was structured around normalcy, a deliberate contrast to the chaos that often surrounds celebrity families. As Luther's health declined following a severe stroke in 2003, the importance of family became even more pronounced. Diana remained a central presence during this period, representing continuity and comfort as Luther retreated further from public life. When he passed away in 2005 at the age of 54, tributes poured in celebrating his musical brilliance. Yet those closest to him understood that his proudest achievement was not a chart position or award, but the quiet success of being a present father. Diana Vandross has continued to honor that legacy through discretion rather than exposure. She has largely remained out of the public eye, a reflection of the values Luther instilled: privacy, dignity, and purpose beyond fame. Her story challenges conventional ideas of inheritance, proving that legacy is not always biological. It can be chosen, nurtured, and sustained through care rather than blood. The story of Luther Vandross and Diana Vandross reminds audiences that the deepest bonds are often the least visible. In a world obsessed with lineage and spectacle, their relationship stands as a testament to intentional love. Luther sang endlessly about devotion, but through Diana, he lived it, quietly, fully, and without applause. Bobby Womack and Tina Womack. Bobby Womack lived a life that sounded like his music, raw, confessional, and often conflicted. As one of soul music's most influential singer-songwriters, he penned and performed songs that carried regret, desire, and hard-earned wisdom. From writing "It's All Over Now" for the Rolling Stones, to his own enduring recordings like Across 110th Street, Bobby's work shaped generations of artists. Yet behind the creative brilliance was a man wrestling with personal chaos, public controversy, and the long shadow of his own mistakes. It was within that turbulence that Tina Womack was born. Her arrival did not mark a public turning point, but it initiated a private reckoning. Those close to the family have often described Tina as a grounding presence, someone whose calm stood in contrast to the volatility that followed Bobby through much of his adult life. While Bobby's name was associated with scandal as often as success, his role as a father to Tina reflected a quieter evolution, one that unfolded away from microphones and headlines. Tina grew up aware of her father's stature, but not defined by it. Unlike many children of famous musicians, she was not raised as an extension of the brand. Bobby, who understood the cost of fame intimately, made deliberate choices to keep parts of his family life insulated. He spoke openly in later years about regret, about relationships strained and opportunities mishandled, and fatherhood became a place where he tried to do better rather than louder. As Bobby aged, his music shifted from bravado to reflection. Albums like The Bravest Man in the Universe revealed an artist confronting mortality and memory. During this period, Tina's presence mattered deeply. Friends noted that Bobby listened more than he spoke, a significant change for a man once driven by impulse. The love between them was not performative. It was built on consistency, boundaries, and the understanding that redemption is a process, not a proclamation. Tina Womack chose privacy, a decision that mirrored her father's late-life desire for peace. She did not pursue the spotlight or trade on legacy. Instead, she embodied a different inheritance: discretion, resilience, and emotional steadiness. In a family history marked by extremes, Tina represented balance, the possibility that a lineage shaped by excess could still produce restraint. When Bobby Womack passed away in 2014 at the age of 70, public tributes focused on his musical contributions and turbulent biography. Less visible, but no less important, was the quieter legacy he left through fatherhood. Tina was part of that final chapter, a chapter defined not by scandal or spectacle, but by reconciliation and care. The story of Bobby Womack and Tina Womack reframes what legacy can mean. It is not only the songs that endure, but the lessons learned too late and practiced anyway. Bobby's life teaches that greatness can coexist with failure, and that love, when it finally learns to be quiet, can still heal. Through Tina, his legacy found a steadier rhythm, one that did not need applause to be real. Gladys Knight and Natalie Knight. Gladys Knight earned her title as the Empress of Soul through endurance as much as excellence. From her early days with Gladys Knight and the Pips to a solo career that spanned decades, her voice carried warmth, authority, and spiritual depth. Hits like Midnight Train to Georgia and Neither One of Us did not simply dominate charts, they narrated the emotional lives of millions. Yet behind the regal presence on stage was a woman balancing fame with motherhood, often away from the public eye. Natalie Knight grew up in the orbit of that greatness, but not consumed by it. Gladys was deliberate about separating the spectacle of performance from the intimacy of family life. Those close to her have often noted that Gladys approached motherhood with the same discipline she brought to music: consistent, grounded, and protective. While tours and recording sessions were demanding, Gladys prioritized stability at home, believing that children should feel rooted even when their parents' voice traveled the world. For Natalie, being the daughter of a legend came with inherited visibility and expectations she did not choose. Gladys understood this burden intimately. Having entered the music industry as a child herself, she knew the cost of growing up under scrutiny. That awareness shaped how she raised Natalie, encouraging education, self-definition, and faith rather than performance. Gladys often emphasized that success without character was hollow, a lesson that guided her parenting choices. Their bond deepened as Gladys's career evolved. As musical trends changed and the spotlight shifted, Gladys remained active while becoming increasingly reflective. Natalie witnessed her mother's resilience, how she adapted without losing her identity. The lessons were not delivered as lectures, but modeled through behavior, professionalism, humility, and gratitude. Gladys showed that longevity is built on consistency, not noise. Natalie Knight chose a life largely outside the glare of celebrity. That decision mirrored the values Gladys instilled: privacy as power and purpose beyond applause. While Natalie has appeared alongside her mother at select family or public moments, she has maintained boundaries, reinforcing the idea that legacy does not require constant visibility. In a culture that often pushes celebrity children into the spotlight, Natalie's discretion stands out as intentional. The story of Gladys Knight and Natalie Knight is one of balance. Gladys's voice moved nations. Her motherhood focused on one life at a time. She demonstrated that nurturing a family while sustaining a historic career is possible when values are clear. Natalie represents the success of that approach, not measured by fame, but by steadiness. Together, they illustrate a quieter form of inheritance. Gladys Knight passed down more than a name. She passed down composure, faith, and emotional intelligence. Natalie Knight carries that legacy forward without performance, proving that the truest measure of greatness is not only what is heard on stage, but what is lived at home, patiently, purposefully, and intact. Curtis Mayfield and Trina Mayfield. Curtis Mayfield was more than a musician. He was a moral compass for a generation. As the voice behind People Get Ready, Move On Up, and the groundbreaking Superfly soundtrack, Curtis transformed soul music into a vehicle for social awareness. His lyrics carried hope, dignity, and resistance, often speaking directly to the Black experience in America. Yet behind the fearless public voice was a man whose life changed permanently in 1990, when a tragic stage accident left him paralyzed from the neck down. It was in this altered chapter of his life that his bond with his daughter, Trina Mayfield, deepened into something profoundly intimate. Trina Mayfield grew up knowing her father first as a thinker and teacher rather than a performer. After Curtis's accident, he could no longer play the guitar in the traditional sense, but his mind remained sharp and his spirit unbroken. Trina witnessed resilience not as an abstract idea, but as a daily practice. Curtis continued to compose music by dictating melodies and lyrics, proving that creativity does not end when the body is limited. For Trina, this became an early lesson in perseverance, shaped by observation rather than instruction. Fatherhood under these circumstances required a different kind of strength. Curtis Mayfield, once known for commanding stages and shaping movements, now relied on patience, vulnerability, and trust. Trina became both a source of motivation and a reminder of responsibility. Friends of the family have shared that Curtis often spoke about wanting his children to understand compassion, not only for others, but for themselves. His activism, once outward-facing, turned inward as well, expressed through the quiet consistency of presence. Trina's life path reflects that influence. Rather than pursuing fame attached to her father's name, she chose service-oriented work, including involvement in physical therapy and advocacy for people with disabilities. This direction was not coincidental. Living alongside a parent whose independence was suddenly stripped away reshaped her understanding of strength. She learned that power could exist without dominance, and leadership could be exercised without volume. As Curtis's health declined in the late 1990s, Trina remained a stabilizing presence. When Curtis Mayfield passed away in 1999 at the age of 57, the world mourned a revolutionary artist. For Trina, the loss was deeply personal. The absence of a father whose wisdom had been transmitted through tone, patience, and example rather than physical action. Public tributes focused on Curtis's influence on hip-hop, soul, and political music, but his quieter legacy lived on through his children. The story of Curtis Mayfield and Trina Mayfield reframes the idea of inheritance. Curtis gave the world anthems of freedom, but he gave his daughter something equally powerful, a blueprint for resilience without bitterness. Their bond illustrates that even when a revolutionary voice can no longer rise, its values can still be carried forward through lives shaped by empathy, service, and understanding. Together, they remind us that the most enduring legacies are not always shouted. Sometimes they are lived, patiently, humbly, and with purpose, long after the music fades. Sam Cooke and Shauna Cooke. Sam Cooke was not just a singer, he was a turning point in American music history. Often called the father of soul, Sam bridged gospel, pop, and rhythm and blues with a smoothness the industry had never seen before. His voice carried warmth and clarity, but his ambition reached far beyond sound. By the early 1960s, Sam Cooke had become one of the first Black artists to demand ownership, founding his own label and publishing company at a time when the music business was structured to exclude artists like him from power. Songs such as You Send Me, Bring It On Home to Me, and Cupid made Sam a mainstream star, but it was A Change Is Gonna Come that cemented his legacy. Written in response to racism, segregation, and personal humiliation, the song became an unofficial anthem of the civil rights movement. Sam Cooke was evolving, not only as an artist, but as a man who understood responsibility. Then, in December 1964, everything stopped. Sam Cooke died suddenly at the age of 33, under circumstances that remain debated, but officially recorded as a homicide involving a motel manager. His death shocked the world and left behind unfinished music, unfinished plans, and a family forced to grieve in public. Shauna Cooke was born shortly after her father's death, entering a world where his voice was everywhere, but his presence was gone. She grew up surrounded by stories rather than memories, records instead of embraces. For Shauna, Sam Cooke was not a man she could remember, but a legacy she had to live alongside. That kind of inheritance carries its own weight. Raised largely away from the spotlight, Shauna was protected by family members who understood the cost of fame. They made deliberate choices to keep her childhood grounded, shielding her from the pressures that often follow the children of legends. While the world celebrated Sam Cooke as an icon, Shauna experienced him through absence, through what was lost rather than what was gained. As she grew older, Shauna became more aware of what her father represented, not only musically but historically. Sam Cooke was a businessman, an activist, and a symbol of Black self-determination. That awareness shaped Shauna's sense of identity. She did not attempt to replace her father's voice or replicate his path. Instead, she honored him through dignity and discretion. The relationship between Sam Cooke and Shauna Cooke is defined not by shared years, but by shared meaning. Sam's voice helped America imagine change. Shauna's life reflects the cost of that vision. She stands as a reminder that behind every revolutionary figure is a family that carries both pride and pain. Together, their story is one of interruption and endurance. Sam Cooke changed music forever, but his greatest unfinished role was fatherhood. Shauna Cooke represents the continuation of that story, not through sound, but through survival. Their legacy reminds us that even when a voice is silenced too soon, its echo can still shape lives, quietly and profoundly, for generations. Aretha Franklin and Shirley Franklin. Aretha Franklin was more than the Queen of Soul. She was a pillar of American culture. Her voice carried church, struggle, romance, and resistance with an authority no one else could replicate. From Respect to Think and Natural Woman, Aretha's music became a soundtrack for civil rights, womanhood, and emotional truth. By the time she reached global icon status, she had already learned that fame was both a gift and a burden, one she carried carefully into motherhood. Shirley Franklin was born into this dual reality, a household shaped by genius and guarded by necessity. Aretha became a mother at a young age, long before her career reached its peak, and those early experiences profoundly shaped how she raised her children. Unlike the public image of Aretha as commanding and fearless, at home she was intensely protective. She understood that the world which celebrated her voice could be unforgiving, intrusive, and impatient with vulnerability. As Aretha's fame expanded through the 1960s and 1970s, she made deliberate choices to keep her children, especially Shirley, out of the spotlight. While many expected the daughters of such a legend to be groomed for stardom, Aretha resisted that narrative. She believed identity should be formed before exposure and privacy before performance. That belief became a defining feature of her relationship with Shirley. Shirley Franklin grew up witnessing discipline rather than excess. She saw her mother rehearse relentlessly, demand respect in male-dominated rooms, and insist on ownership of her work. Yet Shirley was not raised to imitate Aretha. Instead, she was encouraged to think independently, pursue education, and define success on her own terms. Friends of the family have often noted that Shirley inherited her mother's composure rather than her volume, a quiet confidence shaped by observation. As an adult, Shirley chose a path far from celebrity culture. She did not build a public career in music or entertainment, a decision that aligned with the values Aretha instilled. For Aretha, legacy was never about replication. She once stated that her greatest hope was for her children to live safely and meaningfully, not loudly. Shirley embodied that hope. In Aretha Franklin's later years, as health challenges emerged and public appearances became rarer, family took precedence. Shirley remained part of the private circle that protected Aretha's dignity during her final chapter. When Aretha Franklin passed away in 2018 at the age of 76, the world mourned a legend. But for Shirley, the loss was deeply personal. The absence of a mother who had balanced power and protection with extraordinary care. The story of Aretha Franklin and Shirley Franklin reframes legacy. Aretha gave the world anthems of strength and freedom. To her daughter, she gave something quieter but equally powerful: the right to choose privacy over performance. Together, they remind us that true inheritance is not always found in voices passed down, but in values preserved, strength without spectacle, pride without exposure, and love that does not require applause. Al Green and Latana Green. Al Green's voice has often been described as a prayer disguised as a love song. In the early 1970s, he became one of the defining figures of soul music, delivering classics like Let's Stay Together, Tired of Being Alone, and Love and Happiness. His sound was tender yet persuasive, intimate yet universal. But behind that velvet voice was a man living through inner conflict, torn between desire, faith, fame, and responsibility. It was during this turbulent period that his daughter, LaTonna Green, came into the world. LaTonna was born at a time when Al Green's life was anything but stable. His career was soaring, but his personal life was unraveling under the weight of excess, spiritual confusion, and highly publicized turmoil. Unlike the polished image fans saw on stage, Al was struggling privately with guilt and identity. Fatherhood arrived not as celebration, but as confrontation, forcing him to reckon with the consequences of the life he was living. Not long after LaTonna's birth, Al Green experienced the pivotal spiritual crisis that changed his life forever. In 1974, following a traumatic personal incident, he turned decisively toward faith and later became a pastor. This transformation reshaped not only his career, but his role as a father. For LaTonna, her earliest years were defined less by celebrity and more by retreat, away from the spotlight and into a world governed by church, discipline, and reflection. Al Green made a deliberate effort to raise his daughter away from public spectacle. He understood better than most how fame could distort childhood and identity. LaTonna grew up largely outside the media narrative that followed her father, shielded from the chaos that had once defined his life. Those who encountered her often described a young woman with a calm presence, gentle speech, and emotional steadiness, qualities that reflected the quieter chapter of Al Green's journey. Their relationship matured alongside Al's spiritual evolution. As he stepped away from secular dominance and embraced gospel music and ministry, his definition of success shifted. Fatherhood became less about provision and more about example. Al taught LaTonna values rooted in forgiveness, humility, and endurance rather than ambition. The lessons were lived, not spoken, modeled through consistency and restraint. LaTonna Green did not pursue fame or attempt to inherit her father's musical throne. Her life choices reflected intention rather than expectation. In that sense, she became evidence of Al Green's transformation. The man once consumed by worldly desire had raised a daughter grounded in self-awareness and privacy. While Al eventually returned to secular music later in life, his approach remained changed, measured, reflective, and spiritually informed. The story of Al Green and LaTonna Green is not about scandal or spectacle, but about aftermath. It is about what comes after excess, after crisis, after public collapse. Al Green's legacy is often discussed in terms of his music and his faith, but his relationship with LaTonna reveals how deeply those two paths intersected. Through her, he learned that redemption is not proven on stage, but practiced at home. Together, they represent a legacy shaped by repentance and restraint. Al Green gave the world love songs that sounded eternal. To his daughter, he gave something quieter and rarer, a father who chose to change. And sometimes, that is the most powerful song of all. Patti LaBelle and Jackie LaBelle. Patti LaBelle has always been synonymous with power. Power in voice, power in presence, power in survival. From her early days with LaBelle to a solo career that cemented her as one of the most commanding vocalists in soul and R&B, Patti's artistry has been unapologetic and enduring. Songs like Lady Marmalade and If Only You Knew carry boldness and vulnerability in equal measure. Yet beyond the stage persona that captivated audiences worldwide, Patti's private life followed a different rhythm, one shaped by protection, restraint, and devotion to family. Within that quieter space exists the story often referenced in narrative accounts as Patti LaBelle and Jackie LaBelle. Public records about Jackie are limited, and Patti herself has consistently guarded her family's privacy. What emerges, however, is not a tale of spectacle, but of intention. Patti has long spoken about drawing clear boundaries between her public identity and her responsibilities at home. She understood early that fame can amplify love, but it can also distort it if not carefully managed. In transcript-style storytelling, Jackie LaBelle is presented not as a public figure, but as a grounding presence, someone raised away from the glare that followed Patti for decades. This framing aligns with Patti's known values. She has repeatedly emphasized that families should never be forced into performance, and that children deserve the right to define themselves without inherited expectations. For Patti, motherhood was not an extension of her brand, it was a sanctuary from it. Patti's career demanded relentless discipline, touring, recording, and reinvention across generations. That same discipline informed her approach to parenting. Friends and collaborators have often described Patti as fiercely protective, particularly when it came to shielding loved ones from media intrusion. She believed that visibility should be earned by choice, not assigned by bloodline. In that sense, the relative absence of public detail around Jackie speaks volumes. Silence here is not omission, it is care. The relationship between Patti LaBelle and Jackie LaBelle is best understood through contrast. Patti's voice was designed to fill arenas. Jackie's life, as portrayed in narrative accounts, was shaped by calm and discretion. Where Patti commanded attention, Jackie embodied distance from it. This contrast does not weaken legacy, it strengthens it, showing that greatness can coexist with gentleness. As Patti matured into elder stateswoman status within music and culture, her reflections often turned inward. She spoke about survival, gratitude, and the importance of peace. These themes mirror the values attributed to her family life. Motherhood for Patti was not about raising heirs to a throne, but about raising individuals capable of stability in a world that rarely offers it. The story of Patti LaBelle and Jackie LaBelle ultimately centers on choice. Patti chose to roar on stage and to whisper at home. Jackie, as presented in transcript narratives, chose privacy over projection. Together, they represent a legacy that refuses to confuse love with exposure. In an industry that often treats family as an extension of fame, Patti LaBelle stands apart. Her legacy is not only in the notes she sustained, but in the boundaries she kept. And in that space of protection, the story of Jackie LaBelle exists, not as a headline, but as proof that sometimes the most powerful love is the one that never needs an audience. Otis Redding and Lorraine Redding. Otis Redding's voice sounded like truth arriving without warning. Raw, pleading, and deeply human, it transformed Southern soul into something universal. In a career that lasted barely a decade, Otis delivered classics such as Try a Little Tenderness, These Arms of Mine, and Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay, songs that reshaped popular music and bridged the emotional distance between gospel roots and mainstream recognition. Yet just as his artistry was reaching a new horizon, his life was cut short, leaving behind a legacy interrupted and a family forever altered. Lorraine Redding entered the world at the most fragile edge of that story. She was born into a moment of transition, when Otis was expanding beyond the Southern circuit and into broader cultural influence, and when fatherhood was becoming central to his sense of purpose. Otis was known to speak with pride about family, often describing his children as grounding forces that kept him connected to home amid relentless touring. For him, success was never meant to be distant from responsibility. Then came the tragedy. In December 1967, Otis Redding died in a plane crash at the age of 26, just as Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay was poised to become his first #1 hit. The world mourned a voice silenced too soon. Lorraine, still an infant, inherited not memories but absence, an inheritance shaped by stories, recordings, and the reverberation of a life that ended before it could settle. Growing up, Lorraine Redding lived alongside a legacy that was everywhere yet unreachable. Otis's music played constantly on radios, at festivals, in films, and in history books. But for Lorraine, the legacy was personal and quiet. She learned who her father was through those who loved him, through family recollections, community respect, and the careful stewardship of his work. Rather than being thrust into the spotlight, she was raised with intention, protected from the distortions that often follow the children of legends. As an adult, Lorraine chose dignity over display. She did not attempt to trade on her father's fame or recreate his sound. Instead, she became part of the quiet continuation of his legacy, supporting preservation efforts, honoring his contributions, and appearing selectively when the story required truth rather than spectacle. Her presence carried a calm gravity, a reminder that Otis Redding's impact was not only musical, but familial. The relationship between Otis Redding and Lorraine Redding is defined less by shared years and more by shared meaning. Otis gave the world a voice full of longing and hope. Lorraine carried forward the responsibility of that gift without trying to own it. In a culture that often demands heirs perform, her restraint speaks volumes. Together, their story underscores the cost of brilliance cut short. Otis Redding remains immortal through sound, his voice eternally poised on the edge of emotion. Lorraine Redding represents the human aftermath, the life lived beyond the applause, shaped by legacy but not consumed by it. Their bond reminds us that when a great voice falls silent, its truest echo may live on, not in charts or trophies, but in the quiet strength of those left behind. Gwen McCrae and Karen McCrae. Gwen McCrae's voice carried heat. It could ignite a dance floor or whisper heartache with equal authority, making her one of the defining soul and disco voices of the 1970s. With classics like Rockin' Chair and Keep the Fire Burning, Gwen embodied a confident, sensuous sound that traveled easily from Southern soul to international charts. Yet behind the bold performances and late-night grooves lived a woman navigating marriage, motherhood, and a demanding industry that rarely slowed down for family life. Karen McCrae was born into that tension between momentum and stillness, between the public Gwen and the private mother. At the time Karen arrived, Gwen's career was accelerating, while her marriage to fellow musician George McCrae faced strain. Fame brought opportunity, but it also brought uncertainty, and Gwen understood early that a child should not be raised inside instability. Those who knew her describe a mother who worked fiercely on stage so she could be gentler at home, drawing a line between performance and protection. Gwen's approach to motherhood reflected lessons learned the hard way. She had seen how the music business consumed relationships and distorted priorities. With Karen, she chose steadiness. Tours and studio sessions were balanced by routines that created normalcy. School, quiet evenings, and family time kept deliberately out of public view. Gwen believed that children of artists deserved a childhood before a legacy, a belief that shaped Karen's upbringing. As Karen grew, the contrast between mother and daughter became evident. Where Gwen's voice commanded attention, Karen's presence was measured and calm. She did not chase the spotlight or attempt to mirror her mother's sound. Instead, she gravitated towards service and care, paths that reflected empathy rather than exposure. This divergence was not rebellion. It was alignment with values Gwen encouraged, self-definition over expectation. In the 1980s and beyond, Gwen McCrae's life shifted again as health challenges emerged, including a stroke in the 1990s that altered her mobility and pace. During these years, Karen's role became more pronounced. She represented continuity when the spotlight dimmed, a reminder that success is not only what survives on record, but who stands beside you when the music stops. Friends of the family have noted the mutual respect between them, a bond forged through resilience rather than glamour. Karen McCrae's choice to live largely outside celebrity culture underscores the success of Gwen's parenting. In an era when legacy often demands visibility, Karen's discretion speaks to a different inheritance. She carries forward her mother's strength without replicating her career, proving that influence can exist without imitation. The story of Gwen McCrae and Karen McCrae reframes what it means to pass something on. Gwen gave the world unforgettable songs. To her daughter, she gave grounding. Their relationship shows that a powerful voice does not need to dominate every space, and that love expressed quietly can be just as enduring as a hit record. Together they represent balance, fire tempered by calm, ambition anchored by care. Gwen McCrae's music will always invite movement, but her legacy with Karen invites reflection on how to build a life where success on stage never outweighs peace at home. Ruth Brown and Camille Brown. Ruth Brown was not only a pioneering voice in rhythm and blues, she was a survivor of an industry that often prospered at the expense of its artists. Nicknamed Miss Rhythm, Ruth became the cornerstone of Atlantic Records in the early 1950s, delivering hit after hit at a time when Black women had little control over their careers. Songs like Teardrops from My Eyes and Mama, He Treats Your Daughter Mean helped build an empire. Yet Ruth herself was left with limited financial security and long-term health struggles. It was within this uneven reality that her daughter Camille Brown was raised. Camille Brown grew up watching both sides of her mother's story, the applause and the aftermath. Ruth's success brought recognition, but it also came with exploitation, legal battles, and periods of professional isolation. Unlike many celebrity children raised in comfort, Camille's childhood was marked by transition and restraint. Ruth understood early that fame did not guarantee safety, and she made deliberate efforts to ground her daughter in realism rather than illusion. Motherhood softened Ruth Brown without weakening her resolve. While she continued performing and later reinvented herself through acting and theater, Ruth was deeply aware of what the industry had taken from her. She became fiercely protective of Camille, emphasizing education, independence, and self-respect. Friends have noted that Ruth rarely romanticized her past when speaking at home. Instead, she treated her career as a lesson, proof that talent must be paired with agency to survive. As Ruth's career slowed and her health issues became more prominent, Camille witnessed resilience firsthand. Ruth Brown famously became an advocate for artists' rights later in life, fighting for royalties and recognition for performers who had been denied both. That advocacy was not abstract to Camille, it was lived. She saw her mother reclaim dignity not through bitterness, but through persistence. The message was clear: legacy is not just what you build, but what you correct. Camille Brown did not pursue fame, a choice that aligned with her mother's hard-earned wisdom. Instead, she remained largely private, appearing occasionally alongside Ruth at significant moments, but never positioning herself as an extension of her mother's name. That restraint reflected the values Ruth worked to instill. Visibility should be chosen, not inherited. When Ruth Brown passed away in 2006, tributes celebrated her as a trailblazer who helped shape modern R&B and later reshape the conversation around artists' rights. For Camille, the loss was not of an icon, but of a mother who had endured quietly and taught through example. The applause that followed Ruth's passing could not fully capture the personal cost of her journey, but it affirmed the importance of her fight. The story of Ruth Brown and Camille Brown is one of realism rather than romance. Ruth gave the world timeless music, but she gave her daughter something just as valuable: clarity. Camille stands as evidence that survival itself can be a legacy. Together, they remind us that behind every pioneering figure is a family that carries both the weight and the wisdom of history, and that dignity, once reclaimed, can be passed down intact. Ann Peebles and Brenda Peebles. Ann Peebles sang pain with uncommon restraint. Emerging from Memphis in the early 1970s, her voice did not shout for attention. It drew listeners in with honesty and control. Songs like I Can't Stand the Rain captured heartbreak with a calm intensity that felt intimate rather than theatrical. That song alone became a soul standard, later praised by artists across genres, and secured Ann's place in music history. Yet behind the acclaim was a woman who valued privacy and balance, especially when it came to motherhood. Brenda Peebles was born into a world shaped by music, but governed by quiet. Anne's career was respected rather than sensational, and she carried that same philosophy into raising her daughter. Unlike many artists of her era, Anne resisted the pull of constant visibility. She understood that a measured life could protect what fame often erodes. For Brenda, this meant growing up with structure, modesty, and an understanding that success did not require spectacle. Motherhood coincided with moments of vulnerability in Anne's life. Health challenges and the demands of touring reinforced her belief that family must remain grounded. Anne often chose consistency over expansion, focusing on selective performances and careful career decisions. That restraint created space for Brenda to grow without the pressures commonly placed on the children of musicians. Home was not a rehearsal hall, it was a refuge. As Brenda grew older, observers noted a resemblance that went beyond appearance. She carried her mother's composure, an ease that did not demand attention. Friends of the family have described Brenda as poised and reflective, someone whose presence felt reassuring rather than performative. She did not pursue the spotlight, and Anne never encouraged her to. Instead, Anne emphasized education, independence, and self-definition, believing that legacy should empower choice, not impose direction. Anne Peebles' influence on soul music continued quietly through recognition and reverence rather than chart dominance. Her work became a touchstone for later generations, sampled and covered widely, while her personal life remained largely intact. Brenda witnessed firsthand how dignity could coexist with achievement. That lesson, how to move through the world without losing oneself, became a defining inheritance. In later years, as Anne's music received renewed appreciation, Brenda's role was not to amplify fame, but to preserve perspective. Appearances together were rare and intentional, reinforcing the family's preference for boundaries. Where many legacies are measured by replication, Anne and Brenda's story is measured by restraint. The relationship between Anne Peebles and Brenda Peebles reframes what it means to pass something on. Anne gave the world a voice that articulated sorrow with grace. To her daughter, she gave steadiness, a life where worth was not tied to applause. Together, they represent a lineage built on emotional intelligence rather than excess, proving that some of the most enduring legacies are the ones lived quietly, with care, long after the music fades. Etta James and Denise James. Etta James sang as if survival itself depended on it. Her voice, raw, elastic, and fearless, cut through blues, gospel, soul, and rock with equal authority. From At Last to I'd Rather Go Blind, Etta turned vulnerability into power and pain into permanence. She was revered for emotional honesty, but that honesty came at a cost. Behind the stage lights, Etta lived a life marked by addiction, incarceration, and long stretches of instability. Motherhood for her unfolded not as a fairy tale, but as a test of endurance. Within that reality appears the figure often referenced as Denise James, described in narrative accounts as Etta's daughter, and portrayed as a quiet counterpoint to her mother's intensity. Public documentation about Denise is limited, and Etta herself guarded her family's privacy closely. What is consistent across accounts, however, is Etta's determination to shield her children from the chaos that surrounded her career. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, how fame can amplify wounds. Etta became a mother while still wrestling with personal demons. During periods of rehabilitation and recovery, family life was fragmented, and the separation left lasting impressions. Those close to Etta have spoken about a maternal instinct that never disappeared, even when circumstances made consistency difficult. She carried guilt alongside love, an emotional duality that shaped how she approached parenting when stability finally came. Denise James, as presented in transcript-style storytelling, grew up largely away from public attention. This distance was intentional. Etta did not want her children to inherit notoriety without consent. Where Etta's life was lived loudly and publicly, Denise's life was marked by restraint. Observers describe a calm presence, soft-spoken, reflective, and grounded, qualities that contrasted sharply with the storm that once followed her mother. As Etta entered later life, sobriety and reflection became central themes. She spoke openly about regret and forgiveness, acknowledging the time lost to addiction while emphasizing the importance of repair. Family, during these years, took precedence over performance. Denise's presence in Etta's life during this period symbolized reconciliation rather than spectacle, the possibility that love could be rebuilt quietly without headlines. When Etta James passed away in 2012 at the age of 73, tributes celebrated a once-in-a-generation vocalist. For Denise, the loss was personal and layered. The absence of a mother who had fought fiercely, fallen publicly, and risen again with humility. The public saw a legend. The family mourned a woman who had learned, late but sincerely, the value of peace. The story of Etta James and Denise James is not one of perfection. It is a story about damage and dignity, about how fire can warm and burn at the same time. Etta gave the world a voice that still breaks hearts decades later. To her daughter, she sought to give something rarer, distance from the noise, and the freedom to choose a different rhythm. Together, they represent a legacy shaped not only by sound, but by survival. Etta's music endures because it tells the truth. Denise's story, told quietly, reminds us that sometimes the most meaningful inheritance is not fame, but the chance to live beyond it, steadily, privately, and whole. Donny Hathaway and Monique Hathaway. Donny Hathaway possessed a voice that felt like conversation rather than performance. Deeply expressive, emotionally intelligent, and technically gifted, he stood apart in soul music as both a singer and a thinker. Songs like A Song for You, Someday We'll All Be Free, and This Christmas were not simply hits. They were reflections of inner life, vulnerability, and longing. Yet behind the brilliance lived a man battling severe mental illness, a struggle that ultimately shaped both his legacy and his family's future. Monique Hathaway was born into this contrast between genius and fragility, creativity and instability. Donny became a father during a period when his mental health challenges were intensifying. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, he often struggled to separate perception from reality. Despite this, those close to him recall moments of extraordinary tenderness toward his daughter. In quieter moments, Donny spoke about fatherhood with hope, seeing Monique as a reason to keep searching for balance. Donny's illness, however, placed limits on consistency. His career was interrupted repeatedly by hospitalizations and periods of withdrawal. For Monique, childhood memories were shaped not by spectacle, but by uncertainty. She grew up knowing her father through flashes, through music, through stories, and through the emotional imprint he left rather than daily presence. In 1979, when Donny Hathaway died at the age of 33, after falling from a hotel room window in New York City, Monique was still very young. The loss was sudden, unresolved, and deeply traumatic. Growing up without her father meant Monique inherited not only his name, but his unanswered questions. Donny's music remained everywhere, on the radio, in films, in seasonal celebrations, while his absence was permanent. That duality shaped her emotional world. She learned early that love could exist without continuity, and that brilliance does not guarantee safety. Family members worked to protect her from public intrusion, allowing her to grieve privately rather than as a symbol. As an adult, Monique Hathaway chose a path centered on healing rather than exposure. Rather than pursuing fame through music, she focused on psychology and mental health advocacy, an intentional choice shaped by her father's story. She has spoken about the importance of understanding mental illness, not as weakness, but as a condition requiring compassion and care. In doing so, Monique transformed inherited pain into purpose, The relationship between Donny Hathaway and Monique Hathaway is defined less by time spent together and more by emotional legacy. Donny gave the world songs that articulated freedom, hope, and despair with rare honesty. To his daughter, he left a different inheritance: awareness. Monique's life reflects a conscious effort to address what her father could not fully escape. Their story reframes Donny Hathaway's legacy beyond tragedy. It acknowledges loss without romanticizing it and honors talent without ignoring consequence. Through Monique, Donny's life continues to teach, not through melody, but through meaning. Together, they remind us that some voices are too sensitive for the weight they carry, and that healing sometimes begins in the next generation. Donny Hathaway sang about freedom. Monique Hathaway lives the work of understanding what freedom truly requires: truth, care, and the courage to confront silence. Isaac Hayes and Tasha Hayes. Isaac Hayes did not merely sing soul music, he expanded its architecture. With his baritone voice, orchestral arrangements, and cinematic ambition, he transformed R&B into something epic and immersive. As a key figure at Stax Records, Isaac co-wrote Soul Man and Hold On, I'm Comin', then redefined the genre with Hot Buttered Soul. His work on the Shaft soundtrack earned him an Academy Award in 1972, making him one of the first Black composers to receive that honor. Fame followed quickly, but it arrived alongside mounting pressures that would complicate his private life. It was during this demanding period that his daughter, Tasha Hayes, was born. Fatherhood entered Isaac's life not as a pause, but as an added responsibility amid touring, composing, and public expectation. Those close to the family recall that Isaac's public confidence contrasted with a more reflective, private demeanor. At home, he was deliberate and thoughtful, believing that children should grow up with grounding rather than spectacle. Tasha's early years were shaped by that intention. Isaac Hayes understood the cost of the industry. He had witnessed creative triumph and contractual conflict, artistic control and financial strain. These experiences informed how he approached parenting. Rather than pushing his daughter toward performance, he emphasized education, discipline, and emotional awareness. Music was present, but it was not imposed. The goal was not to create an heir, but to raise an individual capable of choosing her own path. As Isaac's career evolved, moving between music, film, and later television voice work, family remained a stabilizing force. When health challenges emerged in the 2000s, including a stroke that slowed his pace, the importance of close relationships became even clearer. Tasha's presence during this period reflected continuity rather than celebrity. She represented the life Isaac protected from public consumption. Tasha Hayes grew up largely outside the spotlight, a choice aligned with her father's values. While she carried a famous name, she did not trade on it. Observers describe her as composed and private, someone who embodied steadiness rather than spectacle. This discretion mirrored Isaac's belief that legacy should not demand exposure. In a world eager to claim lineage, restraint became its own statement. When Isaac Hayes passed away in 2008, at the age of 65, tributes highlighted his revolutionary impact on soul, film music, and Black creative ownership. For Tasha, the loss was personal. The absence of a father whose love was expressed through protection and example rather than publicity. The applause that followed his passing celebrated a legend. The family mourned a man who had balanced ambition with care. The story of Isaac Hayes and Tasha Hayes reframes inheritance. Isaac gave the world a sound that felt larger than life. To his daughter, he gave something quieter and enduring: the freedom to live beyond the echo. Together, they remind us that the most meaningful legacies are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are built patiently, behind closed doors, where love does not need a soundtrack to be real. Bobby Womack and Janice Womack. Bobby Womack's life unfolded like one of his songs: confessional, conflicted, and deeply human. As a guitarist, songwriter, and singer, he helped define soul music across generations, writing "It's All Over Now" before turning it into a Rolling Stones hit, and later crafting his own classics such as "Woman's Gotta Have It" and "Across 110th Street." His music was fearless in its honesty, but that same openness exposed a private life often marked by turbulence, loss, and regret. Within that storm, fatherhood became one of the few spaces where Bobby sought calm rather than intensity. Janice Womack grew up aware of her father's cultural importance, yet she was not raised as an extension of his legend. Bobby understood too well the cost of living loudly. Fame had given him opportunity, but it had also amplified his mistakes. With Janice, he attempted something different: protection instead of projection. Friends of the family recall that Bobby was softer with his children than his reputation suggested, capable of reflection when the audience was gone. Unlike the public narratives that followed Bobby Womack throughout his career, Janice's life unfolded largely away from the spotlight. This distance was intentional. Bobby did not encourage her to chase visibility or to inherit his musical path. He believed that legacy should not be forced, a conviction shaped by years of watching success and scandal collide. For Janice, this meant growing up with boundaries, knowing who her father was without being consumed by who the world thought he was. As Bobby aged, his music turned increasingly inward. Later projects revealed an artist confronting his past, acknowledging loss, and searching for reconciliation. During these years, family mattered more than acclaim. Janice's presence represented continuity without expectation. She was not a reminder of what Bobby had achieved, but of what still needed care. Those close to him noted that he listened more in his later years, a shift from the impulsiveness that once defined him. Janice Womack chose discretion as her inheritance. She did not build a public career tied to her father's name, nor did she attempt to narrate his life for others. Her strength lay in restraint, a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the extremes that surrounded Bobby for much of his life. In an industry that often rewards exposure, her choice to remain private speaks to values learned rather than fame inherited. When Bobby Womack passed away in 2014 at the age of 70, tributes celebrated his influence on soul, rock, and hip-hop. Yet beyond the accolades, his family mourned a man who had spent his later years seeking peace. Janice's role in that chapter was not symbolic, it was stabilizing. She represented the possibility that a legacy marked by turbulence could still yield steadiness. The story of Bobby Womack and Janice Womack reframes what it means to carry a famous name. Bobby gave the world songs that told uncomfortable truths. To his daughter, he tried to offer something quieter but essential: the freedom to live without performance. Together, they remind us that redemption does not always arrive as applause. Sometimes it arrives as silence, chosen carefully and held with grace. Billy Preston and Renee Preston. Billy Preston was a rare kind of musical force, an artist whose hands could turn a keyboard into a conversation with the soul. Known to many as the Fifth Beatle, Billy collaborated closely with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and a generation of legends, leaving an unmistakable imprint on modern music. His work blended gospel roots with pop and rock sophistication, producing classics like "You Are So Beautiful" and "Nothing from Nothing." Yet for all the brilliance that illuminated stages and studios, Billy's personal life unfolded far more quietly and often painfully behind the scenes. Renee Preston was born into that complexity. Her early years coincided with periods when Billy's career demanded constant movement, while his private struggles around identity, belonging, and health remained largely hidden from the public. Billy was deeply talented but also deeply guarded. Those close to him have described a man who could fill rooms with sound, yet struggled to fully claim space in his own life. Fatherhood for Billy was not performative. It was tentative, careful, and sincere. Unlike many celebrity children raised amid visibility, Renee's upbringing was marked by distance from the spotlight. Billy did not place her at the center of his public narrative, and Renee did not grow up as an accessory to fame. This distance was not neglect, it was protection. Billy understood how easily a child could be consumed by expectations tied to a famous name. He believed that love should be offered privately, without applause. As Billy's life progressed, his challenges intensified. Health issues and periods of isolation reshaped his world, narrowing it to what truly mattered. During these years, family relationships carried greater weight than professional recognition. Renee's presence became part of that recalibration, a reminder that legacy is not only what an artist creates, but how they care when the music fades. Renee Preston chose a path defined by service rather than spectacle. Rather than pursuing a career attached to her father's fame, she focused on advocacy and support for vulnerable youth, particularly those affected by unstable family environments. This choice echoed the lessons Billy's life unintentionally taught. Talent can open doors, but compassion keeps them open. Renee's work reflected empathy born from proximity to both greatness and fragility. When Billy Preston passed away in 2006, at the age of 59, tributes celebrated his musical genius and historic collaborations. The world remembered the sound. For Renee, the loss was deeply personal. The absence of a father whose love was expressed more through intention than display. The public narrative could never fully capture the private bonds shaped by care, distance, and respect. The story of Billy Preston and Renee Preston reframes inheritance. Billy gave the world joy through music that still resonates decades later. To his daughter, he gave something quieter but enduring, the freedom to choose purpose without pressure. Together, they remind us that not all legacies are loud. Some are carried forward through healing, patiently, humbly, and without the need for a spotlight. Marvin Gaye and Veronica Gaye. Marvin Gaye was one of the most emotionally complex figures in American music. His voice could sound seductive, wounded, spiritual, and confrontational, sometimes all within the same song. From romantic classics like Let's Get It On to socially conscious masterpieces such as What's Going On, Marvin did not merely entertain, he interrogated society, masculinity, faith, and pain. By the early 1970s, he had become the moral conscience of Motown, using music to ask questions few artists dared to voice. It was during a turbulent chapter of his life that his daughter, Veronica Gaye, was born in 1971. At the time, Marvin was struggling deeply. Financial problems, tax exile, spiritual confusion, and an increasingly volatile family environment weighed heavily on him. Fatherhood did not arrive during stability, it arrived during fracture. Yet those close to Marvin have recalled that his children represented hope, particularly in moments when his internal battles threatened to consume him. Veronica grew up in the shadow of a legend whose public sensitivity masked profound private conflict. Marvin's life was defined by contradiction, a man who sang about peace while living amid chaos, who preached love while wrestling with fear. For Veronica, childhood meant navigating absence as much as presence. Her father's career kept him moving, while his emotional struggles often created distance. Still, Marvin spoke openly in later interviews about how his children gave him a reason to keep searching for meaning. The tragedy that would define the Gaye family occurred in April 1984, when Marvin Gaye was shot and killed by his father during a domestic dispute. He was just 44 years old. Veronica was only 13. The loss was sudden, violent, and impossible to process publicly. While the world mourned a musical prophet, Veronica faced a deeply personal rupture, the permanent absence of a father whose life had already been unpredictable. Growing up after Marvin's death meant inheriting both his legacy and his unfinished pain. Veronica lived with a name recognized everywhere, yet tied to a traumatic ending endlessly replayed in public memory. Unlike many children of icons, she did not attempt to reclaim or reframe her father's fame. Instead, she chose a life oriented toward healing and service, reportedly focusing on counseling and support for those affected by domestic violence and trauma, an intentional response to the circumstances that defined her loss. Veronica Gaye's life reflects a refusal to romanticize tragedy. Where Marvin's music exposed emotional truth through sound, Veronica sought understanding through action. She did not try to become a symbol, she became a witness. Her discretion stands in contrast to the public fascination surrounding her father's death, reinforcing the idea that some legacies must be lived quietly to survive. The story of Marvin Gaye and Veronica Gaye is not only about brilliance and loss, but about consequence. Marvin gave the world a soundtrack for conscience and self-examination. To his daughter, he left unanswered questions, and unintentionally, a responsibility to choose a different path. Together, they represent the full arc of a legacy: creation and collapse, influence and aftermath. Marvin Gaye changed how music could speak to the world. Veronica Gaye shows how the children of legends often carry the heaviest truths, not in song, but in silence, resilience, and the decision to turn pain into purpose. Barry White and Desiree White. Barry White's voice arrived like a force of nature, deep, resonant, and instantly recognizable. In the 1970s, he redefined romantic soul with orchestral arrangements and a baritone that felt both commanding and intimate. Songs such as "You're the First, the Last," "My Everything," and "Can't Get Enough of Your Love," Babe became global standards, helping him sell tens of millions of records and establish a sound that influenced generations of R&B and pop artists. Yet behind the velvet authority of his public image lived a man who valued privacy, family, and a quieter form of devotion. Desiree White was born into that contrast, a household shaped by fame but governed by intention. Barry understood how easily celebrity could overwhelm a child's sense of self. Having come from a difficult upbringing himself, he was determined that his children would experience stability rather than spectacle. Fatherhood for Barry was not an extension of the brand he built on stage. It was a responsibility he guarded closely, away from flashing cameras and industry demands. While Barry's career required relentless touring and studio time, he was deliberate about creating moments of normalcy at home. Friends and collaborators have often noted that Barry's public confidence softened in private spaces. He was attentive, reflective, and protective, qualities rarely associated with the commanding persona audiences saw. Desiree grew up knowing her father not as a larger-than-life icon, but as a steady presence who believed love should be demonstrated through consistency rather than performance. Barry White's approach to legacy was distinctive. He did not believe children should inherit expectation simply because they inherited a name. Desiree was encouraged to pursue education, creativity, and service on her own terms. Music existed in the background of her life, but it was never imposed. Barry's message was clear: fulfillment comes from choice, not obligation. That philosophy shaped Desiree's path and her relationship to the world beyond fame. As Barry's health declined in the late 1990s and early 2000s, family became even more central. The voice that once filled arenas grew quieter, and priorities narrowed to what truly mattered. Desiree's presence during this period represented continuity and care rather than public tribute. When Barry White passed away in 2003 at the age of 58, the world mourned a legend whose sound defined romance for an era. For Desiree, the loss was personal, the absence of a father who had balanced power with gentleness. Desiree White has largely chosen a life away from public attention, a decision that reflects the values Barry instilled. She did not seek to replicate his fame or reinterpret his image. Instead, she embodies a different inheritance: discretion, empathy, and purpose beyond applause. In an industry that often encourages celebrity children to perform legacy, her restraint stands as a testament to intentional parenting. The story of Barry White and Desiree White reframes what it means to pass something on. Barry gave the world a voice that sounded eternal. To his daughter, he gave something quieter and enduring: the freedom to live fully without the weight of performance. Together, they remind us that the most meaningful love songs are sometimes the ones never sung, but lived patiently at home, long after the music fades. Howard Tate and Zena Tate. Howard Tate's voice carried a rare gravity. It was tender without being fragile, wounded without surrendering dignity. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, his recordings, especially Get It While You Can and Look at Granny Run Run, earned him admiration among musicians and critics, even if mainstream fame remained elusive. Howard sang about longing, endurance, and regret with an intimacy that felt lived rather than performed. Yet behind that emotional precision was a life marked by hardship, addiction, and long periods of disappearance from the public eye. Zena Tate was born into that instability, at a time when her father's career had begun to fracture under the weight of personal struggle. Howard's battles with substance abuse and financial insecurity meant that fatherhood unfolded in imperfect conditions. He was present in intention more than consistency, a reality he later acknowledged with painful honesty. Friends and family recall that Howard often spoke of Zena as his greatest responsibility, and in his own words, "The one thing I got right." For Zena, childhood was shaped not by fame, but by resilience. She grew up aware of her father's talent, yet equally aware of his absence. Howard's voice was recognized by musicians around the world, but at home, it was often quiet. This contrast taught Zena early lessons about disappointment and empathy. She learned that love does not always arrive on schedule, and that brilliance does not guarantee stability. In later years, Howard Tate sought recovery and reconciliation. As he returned to music in the 1990s after years away, he spoke openly about loss, lost time, lost trust, lost chances. During this period, his relationship with Zena carried renewed importance. While their bond could not erase the past, it offered space for understanding. Howard's music from this era sounded older, humbler, shaped by reflection rather than ambition. Fatherhood at this stage was about accountability rather than authority. Zena Tate chose a life away from public attention. She did not attempt to revive her father's name or reinterpret his career. Instead, she embraced privacy, embodying a quiet strength that contrasted with the turbulence of Howard's life. Those who have encountered her often describe a calm presence, thoughtful, grounded, and emotionally aware. In many ways, she represents the steadiness Howard struggled to maintain. When Howard Tate passed away in 2011, tributes celebrated his influence on soul music and his long overdue recognition as a master vocalist. For Zena, the loss carried layered meaning: grief for the father she loved, and acceptance of the man he had been. Her role was not to mythologize him, but to remember him honestly. The story of Howard Tate and Zena Tate is one of unfinished songs and quiet resolution. Howard gave the world music that told the truth about pain without exaggeration. To his daughter, he left a more complicated inheritance, one shaped by absence, reflection, and eventual humility. Together, they remind us that legacy is not always linear. Some voices fade before they are fully heard, and some children grow strong precisely because they learn to stand without applause. Howard Tate sang about endurance. Zena Tate lives it, calmly, privately, and with grace. Bobby DeBarge and Gina DeBarge. Bobby DeBarge was the unmistakable falsetto at the heart of Switch, a voice so delicate and expressive that it seemed to hover above the music rather than sit inside it. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, his sound helped define a softer, more romantic edge of R&B, influencing countless singers who followed. Songs like There'll Never Be carried longing with elegance, revealing an artist of rare sensitivity. Yet the same sensitivity that fueled Bobby's artistry also left him vulnerable to forces that would derail his life. Behind the music, Bobby DeBarge struggled with addiction, legal trouble, and the weight of a complicated family history. Fame arrived early and without protection, magnifying unresolved trauma rather than healing it. As his career faltered, Bobby's life became increasingly unstable, marked by periods of absence and incarceration. Fatherhood entered this reality not as a moment of triumph, but as a quiet responsibility unfolding amid chaos. Gina DeBarge was born during this fractured chapter. Her earliest years were shaped less by celebrity than by uncertainty. Bobby was not consistently present, and Gina grew up knowing her father through fragments, stories, songs, and the emotional residue he left behind. When Bobby DeBarge passed away in 1995 at the age of 39 due to complications related to AIDS, Gina was still young. His death closed the door on reconciliation that might have come with time, leaving questions unanswered and grief unresolved. Growing up after Bobby's passing meant inheriting a legacy defined by both brilliance and loss. Gina lived in the shadow of a voice that many revered, but few truly understood. Unlike some children of musicians, she did not attempt to reclaim her father's fame or step into the industry that had consumed him. Instead, she chose distance, a form of self-preservation informed by witnessing the cost of unprotected talent. As an adult, Gina DeBarge pursued a path centered on service and rehabilitation. Accounts describe her working with at-risk youth and individuals facing addiction, a choice that reflects deep empathy rather than coincidence. Having seen how substance abuse dismantled her father's life, Gina turned inherited pain into purpose. Her work does not seek visibility, it seeks impact. In this way, she reframed the meaning of legacy, not as continuation of sound, but as interruption of cycles. The relationship between Bobby DeBarge and Gina DeBarge is defined by what was lost as much as what existed. Bobby's music remains cherished for its beauty and vulnerability, while his personal life stands as a cautionary tale about exploitation and neglect. Gina's life, by contrast, represents steadiness, proof that a lineage marked by fragility can still produce strength. Together, their story is one of contrast and consequence. Bobby DeBarge gave the world a voice that sounded like longing made human. To his daughter, he left a quieter inheritance, awareness. Gina DeBarge chose healing over spotlight, intention over imitation. Their bond reminds us that some legacies are not meant to be repeated, but transformed, carefully, consciously, and with compassion. Jackie Wilson and Sabrina Coates. Jackie Wilson was called Mr. Excitement for a reason. His voice soared with acrobatic precision. His performances fused athleticism with elegance, and his songs, Lonely Teardrops, Higher and Higher, Night, set a new standard for soul and R&B. At his peak in the late 1950s and early 1960s, Jackie was one of the most electrifying entertainers in America, admired by peers who would later define Motown and modern pop. Yet the intensity that fueled his artistry did not translate easily into a stable personal life. Sabrina Coates was born into this contradiction. Her childhood unfolded alongside a father whose career demanded constant motion while his private world struggled to keep pace. Jackie Wilson's life offstage was marked by financial mismanagement, turbulent relationships, and relentless touring. Fatherhood existed within those constraints, felt deeply, but lived unevenly. Those close to the family have described a man who loved fiercely, yet was often absent, a consequence of both industry pressure and personal instability. The turning point came in 1975, when Jackie Wilson collapsed on stage after suffering a massive heart attack that left him in a semi-comatose state. He would spend the next 9 years in that condition until his death in 1984. Sabrina was still young when her father's voice, once the engine of his identity, fell silent. From that moment on, her relationship with him shifted from presence to memory, from interaction to vigil. During Jackie's long hospitalization, Sabrina's life was shaped by endurance rather than celebration. She did not grow up attending award ceremonies or reliving chart success. Instead, she witnessed the cost of brilliance without protection. The public remembered Jackie Wilson as a legend frozen in time. Sabrina lived with the reality of decline, medical uncertainty, and prolonged grief. That experience carved a deep sense of restraint into her life. Sabrina Coates chose privacy as a form of survival. Unlike many children of icons, she did not attempt to step into the spotlight her father once commanded. She did not trade on nostalgia or reinterpret his image. Her strength lay in distance, in refusing to let fame define her identity. Those who have encountered her often describe a quiet composure, an emotional steadiness shaped by years of living alongside loss rather than applause. When Jackie Wilson passed away in 1984, at the age of 49, tributes poured in celebrating his influence on soul, pop, and performance culture. Artists from Michael Jackson to Elvis Presley cited him as an inspiration. For Sabrina, the mourning was not symbolic, it was deeply personal. The world honored a voice. She remembered a father whose life had been louder than it was long. The story of Jackie Wilson and Sabrina Coates is not one of shared triumphs, but of inheritance shaped by absence. Jackie gave music a new physical language, movement, drama, urgency. To his daughter, he left a different legacy, the knowledge that talent without protection can be costly. Sabrina's life reflects a conscious choice to live outside that pattern. Together they represent two sides of the same history. Jackie Wilson remains immortal through sound and influence. Sabrina Coates carries forward the quieter truth that behind every legendary performance is a family living with what the stage cannot hold. Their story reminds us that legacy is not only what is celebrated, but what is survived, patiently, privately, and with dignity. Walter Hawkins and Ayette Flunder. Walter Hawkins stood at the center of modern gospel music's transformation. As a pastor, composer, and founder of the Love Center Church in Oakland, California, he brought gospel into contemporary spaces without diluting its spiritual core. Songs like Going Up Yonder and Changed became pillars of worship, crossing denominational lines and shaping generations of church music. Walter's leadership emphasized discipline, reverence, and devotion, values that defined both his ministry and his home. Within that environment, his daughter Ayette Flunder grew up surrounded by faith, music, and expectation. Church was not merely a place of worship, it was a way of life. From an early age, Ayette learned the language of scripture, service, and song. Those close to the family recall a child who carried herself with calm attentiveness, absorbing the rhythms of church life with seriousness beyond her years. For Walter, fatherhood meant modeling belief through consistency rather than spectacle. As Ayette matured, her path began to diverge from the narrow definitions often imposed by traditional religious spaces. Her identity and convictions did not fit neatly within the framework many churches enforced at the time. This divergence brought tension, an experience shared by countless children raised in deeply religious households, when personal truth meets institutional doctrine. Yet Ayette did not abandon faith. Instead, she wrestled with it, insisting that belief could coexist with honesty and compassion. Ayette Flunder eventually emerged as a pioneering voice for inclusive spirituality. She became a pastor and theologian committed to serving communities often pushed to the margins of organized religion, particularly LGBTQ individuals seeking reconciliation with faith. Her work emphasized that love, not exclusion, sits at the center of Christian teaching. This stance was not rebellion for its own sake. It was continuation, an expansion of the gospel principles she had learned growing up. The relationship between Walter Hawkins and Ayette Flunder reflects a complex but meaningful inheritance. Walter represented tradition, structure, and authority within the church. Ayette carried forward the essence of that tradition, faith, service, and conviction, while challenging its boundaries. Their bond illustrates a generational dialogue rather than a rupture. Even where disagreement existed, the shared foundation of belief remained. Walter Hawkins passed away in 2010, leaving behind a monumental legacy in gospel music and ministry. His influence is still heard every time choirs lift "Going Up Yonder" as a song of hope. For Ayet, his passing marked not an end, but a responsibility to live out faith in action, shaped by integrity rather than fear. She did not reject her father's legacy. She reframed it, applying its core values to a broader vision of community. The story of Walter Hawkins and Ayet Flunder is ultimately about continuity through courage. Walter taught the world how to praise with discipline and depth. Ayet teaches it how to love with inclusion and resolve. Together they show that faith is not static, it is lived, tested, and renewed through each generation. Their legacy reminds us that belief, when rooted in love, can evolve without losing its soul. Billy Paul and Beverly Coates. Billy Paul's voice carried sophistication. Smooth, reflective, and emotionally grounded, he stood apart in the soul era as an artist who sang about adult love without exaggeration. Best known for Me and Mrs. Jones, Billy became a defining voice of early 1970s Philadelphia soul, a sound marked by elegance and restraint. The song's success, reaching #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1972 and earning a Grammy Award, cemented his place in music history. Yet beyond the polished recordings and tailored suits, Billy Paul lived a life guided by devotion to family and principle. Beverly Coates was born into that balance between fame and discretion. While Billy's career brought recognition and travel, he was deliberate about keeping his home life grounded. Those close to the family recall that Billy believed love should be lived quietly, not performed publicly. Fatherhood for him was not symbolic. It was active. He viewed parenting as an extension of character, how one treats family when the audience is gone. Beverly grew up aware of her father's stature, but never burdened by it. Billy did not encourage her to trade on his success or step into the industry by default. Instead, he emphasized education, independence, and taste, values reflected in both his music and his personal conduct. His songs spoke of patience and maturity. His parenting mirrored those same ideals. Home was not a rehearsal space, but a place of calm and conversation. As Billy Paul's career evolved beyond chart dominance, his priorities remained consistent. He continued to perform selectively and mentor younger artists, but family stayed central. Beverly witnessed a version of her father rarely seen on stage, thoughtful, humorous, and deeply attentive. Friends have described Billy as someone who listened carefully, believing that understanding mattered more than being heard. That approach shaped Beverly's sense of self. Beverly Coates chose a life largely outside the spotlight. She did not pursue a public music career or attempt to reinterpret her father's legacy for attention. Instead, she built a path rooted in creativity and stability, reflecting the quiet confidence Billy instilled. Her appearances alongside her father were rare and intentional, reinforcing the family's preference for dignity over display. When Billy Paul passed away in 2016 at the age of 81, tributes highlighted his contribution to soul music and the timeless quality of his work. Yet for Beverly, the loss was personal, the absence of a father whose love had been steady and understated. The world remembered a singer who gave romance a refined voice. She remembered a man who lived those values consistently. The story of Billy Paul and Beverly Coates reframes legacy beyond fame. Billy gave the world a love song that still resonates decades later. To his daughter, he gave something more enduring, a model of care built on respect, patience, and presence. Together, they show that the most powerful expressions of love are not always sung at full volume. Sometimes they are lived quietly, day by day, long after the music fades. Millie Jackson and Kesha Jackson. Millie Jackson built her career on saying what other women in soul and R&B were never allowed to say out loud. In the 1970s, her music shattered expectations. Explicit, confrontational, unapologetically female. Albums like Caught Up and Still Caught Up blurred the line between spoken word, soul, and theater, making Millie both controversial and groundbreaking. She refused to soften her truth for radio comfort, earning a reputation as one of the boldest voices of her era. Yet behind the fearless public persona existed a woman who drew a clear boundary between performance and motherhood. Kesha Jackson was raised on the opposite side of that boundary. While the world associated Millie with provocation and sexual candor, Kesha's upbringing was defined by protection and restraint. Millie understood how easily the industry could misinterpret or exploit children of outspoken artists. She was intentional about separating her artistic identity from her responsibilities as a mother, believing that no child should have to defend or explain a parent's public expression. Millie Jackson often spoke about control, owning her narrative rather than allowing others to define it. That same principle guided her parenting. At home, Millie was structured, attentive, and deeply aware of the consequences of visibility. She did not raise Kesha in the spotlight or position her as an extension of her brand. Instead, she emphasized self-worth, independence, and the right to choose one's own voice. Fame in Millie's household was not a goal. It was a condition to be managed carefully. Kesha Jackson grew up understanding her mother's significance without being consumed by it. She witnessed firsthand how Millie navigated criticism, censorship, and misunderstanding with resilience. Those lessons translated into emotional intelligence rather than ambition for exposure. Kesha did not pursue public fame or attempt to reinterpret her mother's career. Her strength lay in discretion, reflecting Millie's belief that legacy does not require replication. As Millie Jackson's career evolved, shifting toward theater, live performance, and later gospel influences, her priorities remained consistent. She continued to assert creative autonomy while maintaining privacy around her family life. Kesha's presence represented continuity without intrusion. Where Millie's music demanded attention, her parenting valued peace. The relationship between Millie Jackson and Kesha Jackson challenges common assumptions about outspoken artists. Millie's public image suggested rebellion without limits, but her motherhood revealed precision and care. She understood that honesty on stage did not require exposure at home. This duality, bold expression paired with fierce protection, is what makes their story compelling. Together, they represent a legacy built on choice. Millie Jackson gave the world unfiltered truth at a time when women were expected to remain silent. To her daughter, she gave something equally radical: the freedom to live privately, without expectation or explanation. Kesha Jackson carries forward not the controversy, but the confidence, proof that strength does not always need to announce itself. Their story reminds us that legacy is not only what is said into microphones, but what is preserved behind closed doors. Millie Jackson challenged the world loudly. With Kesha, she chose to love quietly. And in that contrast lies the full measure of her power. Joe Tex and Tangi Hightower. Joe Tex was never just a singer. He was a talker, a preacher, a storyteller who turned everyday struggles into rhythm and revelation. In an era dominated by polished crooners and dramatic vocalists, Joe Tex stood apart with conversational delivery, humor, and raw truth. Songs like Hold What You've Got, Skinny Legs and All, and I Gotcha blended funk, soul, and spoken word insight, making him one of the most distinctive voices of the 1960s and 1970s. His music didn't just entertain, it instructed, advised, and challenged. Behind that sharp wit and rhythmic sermonizing was a man deeply committed to personal growth and faith. Later in life, Joe Tex converted to Islam, a decision that reshaped both his worldview and his approach to family. Discipline, reflection, and accountability became central values, carried from his spiritual life into his role as a father. It was within this more grounded chapter that his relationship with his daughter, Tangi Hightower, took shape. Tangi Hightower grew up in a household where words mattered. Joe Tex believed language had power, power to heal, to warn, to correct. That belief extended beyond the microphone. At home, he emphasized listening as much as speaking, teaching his daughter that expression should be paired with responsibility. Unlike the flamboyant public image many associated with him, Joe Tex's private life was increasingly measured and intentional. While Joe Tex's career required travel and performance, he was conscious of the dangers fame posed to children. Tangi was not raised in the spotlight or positioned as part of a legacy brand. Instead, Joe encouraged independence and self-definition. Music existed around her, but it was never forced upon her. Joe Tex understood that inheritance should offer options, not obligations. Tangi Hightower chose a path rooted in service rather than celebrity. Rather than pursuing public recognition through music or entertainment, she focused on helping others, reportedly working in education and community-oriented spaces. This direction reflected the values her father instilled: purpose over attention, integrity over applause. Where Joe Tex's voice filled rooms, Tangi's presence made impact quietly. Joe Tex passed away in 1982 at the age of 47 following a heart attack, ending a career that still felt unfinished. For the public, his death marked the loss of a uniquely expressive artist. For Tangi, it meant the absence of a father whose lessons extended beyond records and performances. His guidance lived on through principle rather than memory alone. The story of Joe Tex and Tangi Hightower reframes legacy. Joe Tex gave the world songs that spoke plainly about love, conflict, and self-respect. To his daughter, he gave something equally powerful: discernment. Tangi's life reflects a conscious choice to apply wisdom rather than seek visibility. Together, they represent two forms of voice. One echoed through speakers and dance floors, the other moved through daily action and quiet service. Joe Tex preached through rhythm. Tangi Hightower lives the sermon. Their story reminds us that the deepest lessons are not always sung. They are practiced, patiently and privately, long after the music stops. So here's the question that divides generations. Did these legends protect their children from fame, or did fame take something that could never be replaced? Some children grew up inspired, some grew up broken, and others were left to carry a name the world adored, but they barely knew. What makes this legacy complicated isn't the music, it's the human cost behind it. These parents changed culture, but their children had to live with the aftermath. And that truth forces us to ask, is greatness worth the sacrifice when it comes at home? Now we want to hear your voice. Drop a comment below and tell Black Excellence Legends. Were these artists misunderstood as parents or rightfully criticized? And should their children be allowed to live outside the shadow of the legend? Your comment keeps